this is the time when you've eaten, I've got a mouse here, that's fine. When you've eaten so well that I'm going to see you nodding off to sleep while you're digesting your very good meal. So you're excused if you do. So I'm hoping that I can perhaps keep you entertained a bit. So Mary spoke in very general terms in her session, and now I want to be concrete. I want to give you some examples of things. So I'm from Australia originally. Mary and I got jobs at the University of Illinois, and we moved to the US 12 years ago, and we've been quite lucky in that time to get research funding to try and do something different. So we were unhappy with all the kinds of tools that were around. We thought they reflected old-fashioned ways of teaching. You know, you upload a reading and the student downloads it, you do an ABCD test, you submit your assignment. So we were unhappy with the kinds of implicit pedagogies that were in most learning management systems, which we thought were pretty old-fashioned and not necessarily going to work in the 21st century. So our argument is that new media has really radically changed the way in which we connect. And one of the radical changes is the old model of the newspaper was somebody, an expert journalist writes and it gets distributed and everybody reads the same paper, and there's very little horizontal communication between the readers of a newspaper. The old-fashioned classroom, the professor stood at the front, everyone had the same textbook, and it wasn't designed around those kinds of things. So how do we build new types of learning relationships which will fit more with the 21st century? And what I'm going to do is talk about some pedagogical transformations. I'm going to start with the typical artifacts of the old school, and I'm going to then talk about the ways in which they might change. And I'm going to show you some real examples which I have on the web. I'll show you students' work, I'll show you into classrooms, and you can get a sense of the kinds of alternative environment we're trying to create. So, in fact, this is the little school that Mary was born in Greece, and she was born in a little school in a village which had no road. You had to walk up the mountains on a little path. It had no water, no electricity. So when she was born in Greece, this was the little school. She didn't actually go to this school. Her family migrated to Australia before she went to school. But when we went back there, this was the little school. So all the benches were bolted down in the little village school. And if you look around the other way, the way in which the teacher was positioned was sitting on a little stage up at the front, and there are all the students with their books here. So I want to talk about the relationship of the teacher and the learners, the relationship of the learners to each other, the relationship of the learners to their books. So let's take their books first. So let's read chapter 7. So let's say chapter 7's about volcanoes, let's say. So here are all the students, they're all up to chapter 7 and they're all reading the textbook. Now, one of the funny things about schools is schools can talk about everything and anything in the world. Volcanoes, poetry, history, I mean anything, but the technology of how it's brought into the classroom is a communications technology. And this textbook form was invented a long time ago, perhaps 400 or 500 years ago, and it's a form of summarising the world. One author is going to simplify volcanoes and give you 10 pages on volcanoes in order to bring volcanoes into the classroom because they can't normally be brought in. Now, I'm going to give you the theory of learning that goes with this. See the student there, she has her finger on the textbook and she's writing her notes with this hand, and this is the theory of learning. See between that finger, the volcano's knowledge comes up here like this, and it goes through here, and some of it sticks in the process of you writing your notes, because at the end of the semester or the end of the week or the end of whenever it is, you're going to do a volcanoes test, and it's going to test what you've remembered, right? Now, I'm going to challenge some of those assumptions because I tell you what, I can't remember people's phone numbers. I used to remember everybody's phone number, but now I've got them in my pocket and I look things up. And I'm going to question whether if just valuing memory is a sensible 21st century skill. But let me go on and talk a little bit more about the social relationships of the classroom. So here I am, the teacher, looking over the class, and I see this little girl in the front row there, and she's looking up. And then something terrible happens. The classroom wasn't designed for this. You know, they're all looking to the front, they're working on their own chapter, they're trying to memorise things, and that she's disrupting the children in the class behind. So what I'm going to talk about is 5 ways in which that can be transformed, and they're very, very practical ways. So one of the things we can do with learning management systems and with educational technology is we can reproduce that little classroom. We can read chapter 7, memorise it, do the test, don't talk to anybody else. We can do that in learning management systems. So technologies don't necessarily do anything at all. Now, I think I mentioned to you before that since Mary and I have been in the US in the last 12 years, we've applied for grants around these technology-mediated learning environments, and we always need to thank the people who give us the funds to do it. So we've been lucky to have funds from the US Department of Education, from the Gates Foundation, and from the National Science Foundation to build something different and to build something new. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of these 5 transformations. I'm talking in a much more grounded, practical way than Mary did, trying to illustrate what she said in general terms with practicalities. And the first one is in the means of production of meaning, right? So what we went to, kids came to school and they scrawled like that, and we actually soon got them to do what was down there in the right-hand corner. Now, what I'm going to go now is I'm going to show you what Mary was talking about, which we call multimodal knowledge representations. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep on jumping between PowerPoint, which I have here, and the web, which I have here. So we've been building this environment that we call Scholar. Common Ground Scholar, Common Ground a meeting place, Scholar is the underlying software. So we've been building this, and we've been working with computer scientists and with people in the university who are very interested in contributing to education. We've been building this over the last several years. And I've opened some tabs so you don't have to wait for me to go looking for things. So, you can log in here. And by the way, if anybody would like to use this, it's open, it's free. Some parts of it are not so open. Some of the analytics stuff, which I'm going to show you, we have a not-for-profit that we've created, which makes this available. But some parts of it, at some point, we need to charge money for. But if you want to use it for research purposes and try it out, you can just create an account, and you can do a lot of what's in here. And if you're using it for research, just tell us, and we can give you easy access to it. That's just by way of background. So I've got a number of apps across the top here, and I'm really going to focus on just a few of those. So I'm going to log in, and when I log in, I come to the first app, which is called Community. So I'm going to show you into 3 or 4 of these apps, not all of them, just some of them. And this is my login. This is live. I did it a couple of seconds ago, just before you folks came into the room. And it looks like Twitter, it looks like Facebook. And I belong to a number of communities. So some of these are classes, some of these are not. So we want to build the idea of a knowledge community. We don't want it to be quite like a classroom. We want it to be a peer-to-peer community. And what happens is I don't have friends or followers, I have peers. One of the problems about social media is friends is a really bad idea in an educational context. We want people who are going to be serious collaborative knowledge players. And followers is an even worse idea. So the kind of metaphors that are used, it's not my popularity that matters in an educational context, it's my relationship with my peers where there's no prizes for popularity. So we want to be like social media, but we want to nuance it differently because social media's nuances, the logic is great, which is peer-to-peer, the nuances are wrong. And if I go down the middle, I can see all sorts of things that are happening in my community, the various courses that I'm involved in, various projects, what my peers are doing, and it's an infinite scroll, the same as Facebook and Twitter. So this is everything that's happening in my world. Now, what I can also do in this space, and I'm getting to the multimodal point now, is I want to make a thing called an update, which is I've been asked by my teacher to contribute a piece of an idea or information. I want to contribute it to my peers. That immediately I get this, which is the opposite of a tweet. I get a big box. I can make it smaller, it's a big box, and I can put in videos, I can put in all sorts of ways of representing knowledge. And when I go add an update here, I can optionally push it out to Facebook and Twitter, which produces a tweet or it produces a Facebook feed, and I can come back to here. So we want to be on the same playing field as social media, but it has to be nuanced in a different kind of way. So I want to go now briefly into, I'm going to talk more about this in a second in some other respects, but I want to show you briefly the second space. So creator is over here in community. It's like, I'll go back to here. It's like a classroom discussion space, whereas here I'm doing things that are called projects. And this is an engineering project here, where what happens if you're doing an engineering course? So they're doing a drag on a sphere of a kickball. Sorry, I accidentally clicked that forward when I didn't mean to. That I'm doing it's going to take a little while to open again, there's a lot of media in it. So these students are engineering students and they're doing a drag on a kickball, right? Now normally what happens is you get given an assignment to do and you're given formula and whatever, and you go to the test and you get things right or wrong. It's just now pulling those media back up again. But this is actually the students exposing their thinking, and they're going to do a little experiment where they actually kick the ball. So they've put all sorts of equations in here. They've written around their thinking. So people who know Mary and my work, and I know a few people do, around multiliteracies and multimodality, this is a multimodal knowledge representation. So it involves formulae, it involves words, it involves uploading the Excel spreadsheet where they do the quadratic drag calculator. They create one of these and I can download it and see what they're doing. And then they go out into the quad. This is the quad in our university, and they kick the ball and they've got a video which demonstrates what they've learned. So this is what we call, as I say, a multimodal knowledge representation. And with this we can see all of the students thinking. They're not just getting the answer right, which is here's the equation in the test and what's the answer and you got it right, but they're actually explicitly describing their thinking, and they're using diagrams and data sets and formulae to do this. So that's an example of an engineering piece of work. So that's what we mean by these new forms of knowledge representation. So that's my first point, which is the transformation in the means of production of meaning. We can now produce meaning in these multimodal ways. For people who are kind of interested in the work, some people who know our work might know this. There's a couple of books we've published around multiliteracies, which is to represent our knowledge these days, having these digital tools really helps a lot. So I'm going to go on to my second point, which Mary began to mention a moment ago, which is classroom discussion, forms of classroom discourse. The classic book on classroom discourse was written by a colleague of ours who's now retired, who was for many years a professor at Harvard University, a woman by the name of Courtney Kasdan. And this is the way classroom discussion goes. I'll tell you the classical way. Initiate, student asks a question, a teacher asks a question. So I'm going to ask you the question, right? What's the last planet in the solar system? And you're all going to put up your hands because you know the answer. And I'm going to point out one person and they give me the answer. Initiate, respond, evaluate. I say as the teacher, yes, that's right. So that's the way a classroom discussion typically goes. So what I want to do is I want to say in these social media places we can do the same thing, and it's radically different, and it's also, let me say this, radically better. So I'm going to go now into a classroom at our university. This is a sign that I'm going to jump out and go back to the web. So excuse me going backwards and forwards, but that way I can show you live things. This is a very interesting engineering class. So this is a class which is only it's a very small class. There are only 7 people in this particular class. 2 of the students are in Sierra Leone though. So I think I mentioned before we have a relationship with Njala University in Sierra Leone. 2 of the students are there. So they're working together collaboratively. And this is the activity stream for this particular community. Okay, so in other words, all of these things come up in my activity stream, but with 1,000 other things. But this is just the activity stream for this particular community. Conversations that are going on, people that are talking to each other about various aspects of designing low-cost equipment for medical situations in a place like Njala. So here, what the professor has done, this is her lecture number 8. So she doesn't have lectures. So here's her lecture number 8. She's put in some information. And by the way, what she's done here is she's put in 30 seconds where she speaks. I don't think I'm connected to the audio here, but it doesn't really... There's a bit of audio here. Doesn't matter that much, but might as well just to show you what's going on. Let me just see now.
Technologies for global health purposes. They report some...
And then she's written a bit, and then she said a bit more.
As has been mentioned many times.
And then she's put some diagrams in, and she's put some more illustrations in. So this is kind of a 21st century version of a lecture, which is, again, multimodal. It's not just a video. It's a mixture of audio and data and videos. But then an interesting thing happens at the bottom, because what she says is a comment. What's one standard issue for you in this update? Whatever. And then all the students respond, and they actually start talking to each other. See, at Caitlin, they start talking to each other as well. Let me give you another instance of what happens here. This is in a class that I'm teaching now, which has got some boring number. You know, we give these things boring numbers. It's actually about assessment, and I'm working with teachers. This is EPS 535, my class. I've got 79 people in the class. The admins, by the way, are the professors. We don't call them professors because they're just, in a web context, they're admins. And by the way, there's no reason why a student can't be an admin. And I've got a couple of researchers in here as well and a teaching assistant. So a couple of other people who are there as admins, 79 people in the class. And this is the classroom discussion that's going on. And if I go into this one here, for example, this is new opportunities for digital assessment in the digital age. If I click on that there, you'll see there are 51 comments. Everybody in the class is commenting. But the interesting thing, and what I've done is I've put in a series of short videos, and then here is the classroom discussion underneath. Then here, this is a student-initiated response where I say, make an update. And what happens is the minute we start valuing student experience, student identity, things that we've never thought of. I've never heard of Plickers, and I didn't know they could be used in assessment. It's some free, cheap web tool which a teacher's found and used in a clever kind of way. And they've made a post. They've contributed content. They've been knowledge contributors. And here are other students talking to them about that discovery. Now, let me just jump out for a second and let me make some generalisations about what's going on there and how this is different. So I'll go back to my PowerPoint, and I will go over to here. So it's classroom discourse, and it's utterly different. It's radically changed. The first thing, which is dramatic, is that everybody answers. When I do this and you put up your hand, only one person can answer. Everybody answers. That's amazing. Everyone is engaged, and they must engage. The second thing is lowered barriers to response. Now, I have a theory. Tell me whether you agree with this theory. The theory is the person who puts up their hand and wants to give an answer and who I choose is always the wrong person. Am I right? And you could probably think of an unpleasant word to describe that person, but don't. I don't want to hear it. But you know, I can say that kind of person, you know, they're the last person who should be answering, right? Whereas here, when you go to the bottom of the activity stream there and you go comment, you've got a little bit of time to think about it and you build up a bit of confidence, but you can see what other people are saying. What we're also doing is we're going from the oral to the written. So an oral thing is a bit messy and a bit redundant, whereas when I've got a few seconds to think about this, I can actually be more considered in my comments and frame it up in a way which is a bit more like writing than it is like speaking. But the other interesting thing is when everyone responds, learner differences become visible and valuable. So, you know my Pluto question. You know, that's actually a kind of a trick question because some scientists now think Pluto's not a planet and there are other little particles going around the place which are planets, right? And we can have a discussion about that. There's very few things in life which have straight up or down, right or wrong answers. But what we're expecting in this thing is to guess what's in the teacher's head, which must be the right answer. That's what we're trying to do. Whereas our differences become visible once we start everybody responding and once we start talking to each other about them. It's highly engaging. Look how many comments there are there. Can you think of anything worse than sitting and listening to somebody else giving an answer to a question? That's pretty boring. And in the age of, in the 21st century when people are immersed in social media, it's not very engaging to be just listening. But when everyone's responding and you're looking at 20, 30, 50 responses, you're having to do as much work as you have to do when you're looking at a Facebook feed or a Twitter feed. The read-write mix of participation is about right. Instead of just listening and reading, and then doing the test, you're having to participate, you're having to contribute things, you're having to comment, so it's an equal mix of read and write. But 7, this is Mary's ubiquitous learning point that she made before lunch. This discussion can happen in the classroom, so I could have all of you now all giving me answers all at once and all talking to each other in this room. So uniquely, that person over there could be talking to this person over here, which isn't possible normally in a room like this, but we can do that in this room. But there is no difference between that and doing it overnight. Okay, kids, okay, students, okay, learners, let's talk about this overnight and come back tomorrow and see what we've come up with. So it actually means that the old-fashioned idea that we have to be in the same 4 walls at the same time has gone. We can be there, but we don't have to be there to do this kind of discussion. Anyone can be an initiator, you know, somebody can make a contribution of their own. But my 9th point is perhaps the most important one. We can data mine this. This can be the basis of learning analytics, where we can actually see who's contributing. So the teacher at the end of the year, if I want to have a measure of who's contributed, I have a very subjective measure. Oh, that person was keen, that person wasn't keen, that person seemed asleep, that person seemed like their mind was wandering. Remember the little girl whose mind might have been wandering? But now we can tell who's contributing and who's not, because we can actually data mine this, and I'm going to get to that in my last point. If you want to read a little bit more about this, I'm just giving some references as I go. We have this e-learning ecologies MOOC, which discusses a lot of these ideas, so that's free. You can get it on Coursera, and we've recently published a book around the dynamics of these e-learning environments. So my next point, which is the social relations of text and learning. So remember all the kids sitting in a little classroom in the village in Greece? Well, here's the 21st century classroom, and has anything changed? No, nothing's changed. It's just me. There it was me and my textbook. Now it's me and my computer. Well, what's the difference? From a pedagogical point of view, we've brought in the computers, but nothing's changed in terms of the social relationships of learning. So what I want to do now is I want to go and show you some different things that are happening. This is an example of something that I'm going to go to right now. So let me just jump out and go over to the web. And I'm going to go to past here to my next. So this is a couple of examples. I'm going to give you several examples, 3 or 4 examples of projects that we're doing. This is a project that we're doing with the World Health Organization, where 96 people in a whole lot of different countries around the world are building immunization plans. So let me tell you how the World Health Organization used to do this training. It has a new immunisation plan, which is called Global Routine Immunisation Plan, and it has a PowerPoint with 75 slides in it, and it'll tell you the 7 things you've got to do to build an immunisation plan. And somebody will come and stand at the front of the room like this in a training hall, and they'll tell you what to do. Now, does that value local knowledge, local experience? No, it doesn't. So what we did is, using the Scholar environment, we had people build their own immunisation plans, and in fact these were the ones. These are the actual plans: Mongolia, Nigeria, Guinea. These are people actually in country, Syria even, Ukraine. These are people in country who built these global immunisation plans. And what they did, and this is an example of one, this is the Liberia one that I began to show you, where they built an immunisation plan in Liberia, and they then peer-reviewed other people's plans. So the Liberia people might have peer-reviewed the Mongolia plan, and what happens is, doing an immunisation plan in Mongolia and Liberia is not the same. Right? And these people are already in this business. They do immunisation. So we want to value their knowledge. So yes, we've got the WHO framework. And by the way, here is the WHO framework down the right here, which is, these are the things that are meant to be prioritised. See, this is the rubric here on the side. And by the way, when people come to review that, so when the peers review it anonymously as it thinks I've logged out, that's why I'm doing that. Here's the description and the rating levels, and they write a comment, they pull across the slider, they give it a particular rating, and in this case, just lost my connection with my mouse. Let me get it back again. These are the results. So this is comments from one person. They're giving and receiving. It's because, you know why that is? Because I have been logged out. Let me just go for 1 second and I'll log myself back in again. Anyhow, I'll go new window. Yeah, because I haven't, these are static pages. It logged me out because I hadn't moved anything for a while. Just give me a second, I'll log back in. Anyhow, so what they're doing is that these people here who are doing this work are actually giving each other feedback and valuing each other's feedback, and we're valuing the knowledge that people have, the knowledge that people bring. Here's another example. This is an example, same basic architecture. This is an animal that came into the clinic here at the University of Illinois. It's a at our University of Illinois. It's a multimodal knowledge representation full of diagrams and images and data and whatever. And they're doing a vet analysis of this particular dog. On the right here, what we've got is we've got the review criteria. We've got the results, which is these are that's actually a self-review. I might be able to get back to the first one without logging back in. Let me have a try. Oh yeah, there we go. These are the overall score. This is one person's review. And see, there's a comment back. There's dialogue going backwards and forwards between people. So what we're doing is we're building a peer-to-peer environment where people do a draft of their work and give each other feedback along the way. This is an example that there's particularly a nice example. You can see that text is going from right to left because it's in Arabic. My browser happens to be around this way, but if I had an Arabic browser, the rest would be as well. This is one we're doing with the Norwegian Red Cross, where people in paramedics in danger zones, we're valuing local knowledge. So in other words, people's experience, this is the war in Syria, people's experience of how to be a paramedic in a war zone. Other people in the course who were working in English were people who'd experienced the Ebola crisis in West Africa. So these were people who we're valuing that experience, and we're trying to build on that knowledge in this kind of peer-to-peer horizontal thing, environment, which is more democratic. Another example, this is my own students. You can see they put videos all the way through their work, and so on. It's a multimodal knowledge thing about using wikis in education. This is the peer reviews that have come in. These are one person's reviews, these are another person's reviews. I can join the discussion. Huge amount of feedback coming in along the way, but also annotation. See, I mouse over this and someone had a comment. I mouse over this, someone else had a different comment. I mouse over this, someone had a different comment. So people are giving each other concrete feedback along the way. Now, there's some actually, and then, by the way, when the work gets finished, this is happens to be one of my students. This is like his LinkedIn page, and these then are his publications. I hope it'll come up because I don't know whether I've been logged out. There we go. So these are all the peer-reviewed publications. This is something where he can turn this page on when he goes to get a job, and it shows concretely the knowledge work that he's done in our degree. And by the way, we have this working with little kids in grade 4 and above as well. So this becomes like a portfolio, but it's a portfolio of work that's been produced in the communities that he belongs to. So that's that point about building a very social environment where people are working with each other along the way. Okay, so my next point now, which I want to get to, and again, it's this idea of, let me just go and draw some conclusions about that first. So I've showed you into how it works. This is the kind of workflow here, which is that you write using the embedded rubric. In other words, you see the assessment rubric along the way. You give peer feedback on others. You can give feedback on the feedback as well. You can comment back and rate the rater. You can then revise using the feedback in the rubric. You can do a self-review, which evaluates, look, these are the things I took on board along the way, and then the things get published and they join a community. But at every point, this is a social step. These are a series of elaborate knowledge connections that we're building along the way. And what I want to do is I want to speak very abstractly about the two sides of that screen. So the way we've designed it pedagogically, which is on the left side, you're doing some knowledge representation, be it the dog that's sick, or the immunization plan, or wikis in the classroom, and you're self-regulating that on the right. So you're clear about what you've got to do around this project. On the left, you're doing disciplinary practice, which might be veterinary medicine or education or public health. But on the right, you're doing disciplinary thinking, which is how do we do this well? How do we actually measure it? Empirical work on the left, theoretical work on the right, individual intelligence, which is what's my thinking about this, collaborative intelligence, where I'm giving and receiving feedback. But on the left, I'm doing learning. On the right, I've got assessment going on. Assessment is everywhere. And by the way, I go backwards and forwards between the left and right over and over again. So what's my normal assignment process? At the end of the term, I hand in my term paper and I get back a result which says I got a B+, which means nothing other than you're a mediocre person and do better next time, or something like that. It's a moral judgment with a few comments, and it's linear. You know, I hand it in, I get a result, that's the end of the story. But what we've built here is a recursive process where you do your work on the left, you look at the rubric on the right. You get other people's work to review, you write on the left, you write the reviews on the right. You revise your work on the left, looking at the reviews you got on the right. Then you do a self-review, you look at the final work and do a self-review. So you go backwards and forwards between the two sides of the screen in a very, very social kind of process. Let me jump out now because I'm nearly up to the fourth point of the 5 points, which is, well, what do we do then about pedagogy? So what we have here is, I mentioned the textbook before, that little child with the textbook, where I imagined it was chapter 7 about volcanoes. This is actually kind of an interesting bit of history if you're interested in history. The man who is one of the most prolific authors in early modern Europe, who's now entirely forgotten, is a man by the name of Petrus Ramus, who was a professor at the University of Paris, who had not one original idea, except what he did is he actually redid everybody else's ideas, mainly ancient ideas, in the form of a textbook, and he created the form of a textbook. So see here, section 1, section 2, section 3, from the hardest to the easiest. I'm going to summarise, this is Euclid's geometry. So what he's doing is he's summarising Euclid's geometry. He had no ideas about geometry of his own, but he was going to write the textbook for the students. And that's what textbooks look like today, even if they're e-textbooks. They have the same kind of logic. A single author will summarise the world for you because that's how we bring the world into the classroom. So that's the logic of it. Interesting footnote, he was murdered by his students. But he's a 16th century person, and it was all in Latin. This is a 17th century English translation of Petrus Ramus's Euclid. Now, I'm going to show you something different now, which is something we've been trying to create in our work, which is a thing called a learning module. So yet again, I'm jumping out to the web where I can show you this thing live. So in this particular app over here, the last app in that line of apps, we have a thing called a bookstore, where we're going to put these things called learning modules. But they're very different kinds of objects. I'm going to take the learning module that professor created to go with her Health Technology Innovation with Limited Resources course, which you saw before. You saw the students working in that space. So this is her learning module. And what we have is we have two sides. A right-hand side, which is for the instructor, which things the instructor can do, advice to the instructor. So this is where we do, that's the teacher side. But the student side is a chunk of content which gets posted into every student's activity stream. So when I go here, post left side to a community, I select a community, and that chunk of content on the left gets moved over into everybody's activity stream. So it gets, if there are 30 students in the class or 100 students in the class, 100 versions of this go out into everyone's social media feed. Okay? So one of the important things is that this is dialogical. It's not telling you things, it's asking you to discuss things. See the little comment at the end here? Let's talk about this. Now, along the way, we can also, another form of dialogue, we can do a thing that we call the survey. And see this one here, it actually just looks like a test. You know, we can put a little embedded quiz in, a little test. This is something that we've put in here about mortality rates. So the professor has constructed that as well. And you can see down here, this is the content that you just saw, chunks of content which the teacher has, if you like, all her lectures, little bits of audio, lots of diagram, and if we go down further, we'll find that she's put in videos and all sorts of media objects which get posted into the student's activity stream. So when we go so that's this different type of object. I'll give you another example. This is another World Health Organization project we're doing around stats for health, 146 people working in the group, and here is this is about vaccination coverage again, but it's about stats for vaccination coverage. So in other words, these are things which include videos, where people are talking, but always ends with a thing, let's talk about this, let's discuss it. So it's a very kind of horizontal thing, not like a textbook. And the important thing here is we're not summarising the world now. We can find these videos on YouTube, we can make them for ourselves, we can put in links, we're curating the world. We're not summarising the world, we're curating the world. And this happens to be one of the protocols that was created out of this peer review process. Okay, so that's my fourth point, and I want to get now to my last point, which, but let me summarise this point as well. This involves a couple of very, very big changes. Firstly, we configure in education, we too often configure students as knowledge consumers. Let's configure them as knowledge producers. They're writing projects, they're researching things, they're active thinkers. We want to change the balance of agency. So you know the balance of agency with the newspaper was, journalist writes it, you read it. The balance of agency in social media is pretty evenly balanced. You know, you're doing as much contribution as you're doing, as you're reading, right? So we want students to be very actively doing things, actively speaking, actively writing up projects, actively peer reviewing each other's stuff. The balance of agency in a normal classroom is uneven. You know, a lot of the time students are very, very passive. How can we even that up? And the other important idea is we have productive diversity. So let me just tell you what we mean by that. Diversity of perspectives and ways of thinking and all the various dimensions of diversity become obvious in these places a number of ways. Let me tell you some of them. I'm having the classroom discussion, and the answer isn't just Pluto, because we can have different opinions about this. So the classroom discussion actually values different opinions, and people start talking to each other, oh yes, I think that's right, or I think that's wrong, or maybe this, or maybe that. So by having everybody speak, the diversity comes out. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I hand in my assignment, I get B+. One person has judged my work as B+. But when I get formative feedback along the way from 3 different people, it's different. And I agree with some and I don't agree with others. Some of it makes me think, some of it doesn't. So everywhere the value becomes the diversity amongst the learners. And that may be not just diversity, you're a man, you're a woman, you know, ethnic and racial diversity. It may be just diversity around ways of thinking and life experience and perspectives on things. So diversity becomes a fundamental resource in the classroom in a way that it isn't conventionally. So Mary showed you this image. I'm up to the last point now, which is assessment of learning and of learning. So this is perhaps where what I'm saying is perhaps the most radical, because where I'm going to get to is very soon there'll be no assessment and everything will be assessment. Let me explain what I mean by that. So I'm going to tell you a quick critique, and you know it already, so why am I doing this, of the standard model of assessment. So it happens at the end, and essentially what you're assessing in the standard model is long-term memory. You know, that's really what it is. You might be, you know, about some particular topic, but it's long-term memory. And long-term memory, my definition is, it lasts until the day after the exam. Right? We know that. It's a kind of a joke. It's not short-term memory because you forget things in short-term memory. It's long-term memory. And in fact, the more conservative ed-psych literature still argues for long-term memory. My argument is, I can't remember stuff anymore and I don't need to because I can look it up. You know, it's on the web or it's on, Mary and I have been doing work with doctors and medical education, where now the international standard for diseases, which is ICD-10, it's now, you couldn't possibly remember what it was. And in fact, you can have a tablet in your, because it's got so big, and you can have a tablet, and it's changing, by the way. You know, a few years ago, who'd heard of attention deficit disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder, which are now serious things which weren't even in the old list. So, and there's 40 versions of each of those. So in our professional lives, in our thinking lives, in our intellectual lives, in our work lives, in our everyday lives, We need these things which are now in our pockets or on our computer, and in a way these become what I call cognitive prostheses. You know, it's like having your arm's been cut off and you've got an artificial arm. Well, I'll tell you what, this thing's become my artificial mind, because I don't need to remember things. I need to know how to do things. I need to know how to be critical. I need to know how to work with others in a team in a way which is sociable and which is constructive. But I don't need to remember things, not so much. Also, it measures procedural learning with a very narrow cognitive range. Remember my engineering problem? We could have put that in the test and you could have got it right or wrong, right? And so did I apply the procedures? And the only way I can tell whether I applied the procedures correctly is whether I got the wrong answer. But that's full of false positives, which is I might have got it right accidentally, where I really don't understand it, or I might have really understood it and got it wrong accidentally because I made some silly mistake which I didn't notice. But also tests are very strange artefacts. Where in life or the world are you going to find a thing like a test? No. They're nothing like the artefacts of learning. It's also very limited sampling. At the end of the term, we have a 3-hour test. We have a couple of assignments we hand in. This is a very limited sampling of your knowledge. But they're also often disturbing experiences, as we know. You know, it's stress-making, and is it always fair? And did you get the result that you really deserved? They're also linear. It comes at the end. You don't have much chance to recover from it until you improve your life and become a better person, but that's not easy. It's easier said than done. They're also isolating and individualised. Remember that picture of the kids with their blinkers along the way, which is it's what you can remember by yourself. But one of the important points is they're retrospective and judgmental. They look back and they judge. Whereas the assessment rubrics that people put in an environment like the Scholar environment are suggestive of constructive improvement. So when the peer reviewers look at your work, they're asked to suggest ways in which it might be improved. But the last point, which is perhaps the most important, is that tests insist on inequality. Now, I'm going to tell you the origins of that story and the beginnings of the insistence of inequality. This man, by the name of Henry Goddard, is a very, very famous person in education, now mostly forgotten, but he invented the IQ test. And this is the way an IQ test works. It's putting people across a bell curve. And the terms I put at the bottom were literally the terms that he used for classifying people at various places on a bell curve. Now, how many places in education do we insist on putting people across a bell curve? So, you know, Mary and I, as I say, work in medicine and veterinary medicine at the University of Illinois, and you've got to get 99% in every test imaginable to get into medicine, right? And we still put them across a bell curve. Now, what's interesting that we found with our work is that when you actually put a group of people together peer reviewing each other's work, so you saw the peer review of the sick animal that came into the hospital, when they submit their first draft, yes, there's a fair bit of variety, but these people have equal ability, and when they see each other's drafts anonymously, when they give and receive feedback, when they're part of this very social process, the final products are nearly as good as each other, right? And people might have heard this term mastery learning, that what we do is instead of insisting on inequality, we should create the conditions for more or less equal outcomes in our classes, right? And with these very social environments, we can do that. Now, what we've been doing with the work we've been doing in Scholar is we've been building some learning analytics, and I'm going to get out, and the last thing I'm going to do in this talk is show you the learning analytics. So I'm going to go back onto the web, and I'm going to go into the analytics area. So I'm showing you this because I'll scale it down so you can see a little bit more of the screen. No, that's up. Okay, so this is a class that Mary and I are actually teaching. It's an 8-week class. And there are 40, 50 people in the class, and this is a thing called an Astor plot. Now, let me explain to you the Astor plot. This is a quick visualisation of where everybody's up to. But let me say this, every student has their own Astor. This is the average for the whole class, but every student has their own Astor plot. And what we're going to value is we're going to value... my mouse has just gone to sleep again. Let me wake it up. We're going to value 3 types of things. We're going to value knowledge. We're going to value focus, which is the amount of work you've put in, the amount of effort you put in. But we're also going to value help, which is your collaboration, how you've collaborated in the group. And the outside of the circle there is 100. we start off at 0, and what we say to our students is, if you reach 80, it's an A+, and you're in control of your destiny. And as we mouse across each of these things, we can see what we're measuring. Text quality with natural language processing, average peer review ratings. Now, one of the interesting things is we have 3 peers across 7 criteria, and what we've shown is the average of a peer rating is pretty close to what an expert would rate. So we're crowdsourcing, if you like, that assessment process. This is the average self-review score. This is the number of comments. This is all the stuff you have done. And by the way, if you want to mouse on one of these, like so, it will tell you exactly what you're being measured on. And even though we're only 3 weeks into the course, in fact, there have been nearly 1 million data points down here, this number. Right? Because what we're doing is we're data mining all the discussion, all the peer reviews, all the stuff you're doing. We're constantly data mining that. So we have 1 million data points for that class 3 weeks in. And these metric values are bits of constructive feedback you've got from the machine, from peers. So what we're doing is, instead of getting B+, which is your feedback at the end of the semester, you're getting many, many, many small comments which are amongst the peers in various members of the group. So if you like, this is big data. This is data where we've got very granular information about what the students are doing. But most importantly, we are giving them this information up front. So if I go to any one student, in fact, I can dig down into this. I hope it hasn't logged me out, which it may have, this one. Yes, I can log down into this thing. I can see here where all the students are up to. This is sized differently because it's on the screen here, but let me go into this student. There's a red thing here, it's not doing too well. This student's at 53. So this is the Astor plot that this particular student sees. So I can see where every student's up to along the way in terms of these objectives, and I can dig down into every little piece of data that's going on in the background there. Now, let me just say one last thing about this, in that these outside perimeters in admin settings, this is where I determine everything. So firstly, the sector weights, I've got them equally weighted. If I want to do old-fashioned pedagogy, I'll say, I don't care about collaboration, I'll just make that 0. I just want to know knowledge. We're not telling you have to do what you have to do. You can change those sector weightings. And what you can do is you can set here not only metrics and target values for everything that you're measuring, but also you can even change the text of the mouse over which the student sees. Focus metric, help metric, knowledge metric. These are all the things that are being measured by, and what that does is that then determines the shape of the extent of this outside. This outside limit is the instructor's expectations about student outcomes. So that's an illustration of how we can do the big data work. So I'm going to go back now just to conclude in the PowerPoint. So what we have is embedded learning analytics, which is this the end of the strange textual and social practices of assessment? Our argument is that it might be. We don't need those forms of assessment anymore. But the really radical possibility is to end the distinction between instruction and assessment. So embedded assessment, lots of feedback, formative assessment, we're recruiting the students as peer assessors. That's embedded the whole way. And we don't have to sample. I mean, tests are just sampling because we have everything. We have big data that can give us a very, very comprehensive, but also a timely view. The student's in control of their outcomes, and also the professor can see exactly where the students are up to right from the very start. Mary and I have written an article, this is AERA Open, the American Educational Research Association, their open journal. So this is an open access article. If your library doesn't, you don't need to be able to subscribe to it, where we've kind of thought in theoretical terms about what the implications of big data are, and we think they're pretty dramatic and pretty radical. So if we want to now summarise, and Mary showed you a small version of this before, if we want to summarise what's changing, for us, technology doesn't necessarily change anything. I started saying that at the beginning, so we can do that old-fashioned classroom using technology. So that we can do that, which is very teacher-centred. Teacher uploads a video, student submits an assignment for the teacher to mark, student does a test. We can do all of that stuff using technology, and we call this didactic in the sense of very we're telling you things and you've got to listen. And mimetic, which means copying. It's memory. Memory work is actually various forms of copying. And what we want to describe this new environment as is reflexive. A lot of interaction. A lot of interaction between the curriculum and the students and each other. But we use this word ergative, which means we're not less interested in trying to work out what's in your head than the knowledge artifacts that you produce. The projects that you write up. And we know that they are socially produced because you produce them with peers, and we can see exactly how you produce those things. So we're interested in work rather than cognition. We're interested in knowledge artifacts, knowledge representations. We're interested in things you have done, not what's in your head. So this is a very quick but very abstract summary of what the differences are. So for us, technology is only a means to pedagogical transformation. So this is the old world, which is teacher-centred, learner as knowledge consumer, knowledge transmission, replication, long-term memory, cognitive focus, individual minds, long cycles of feedback. That's the old world. And we can still do that in learning management systems, but what a waste when we've got these technologies which allow us to do this stuff on the right, which is the learner as the agent, knowledge producer, knowledge is discoverable, you don't have to transmit it in those old-fashioned ways, devices as thinking tools, knowledge as judgment, social dialogical minds, and so on. So this is short cycles of feedback, recursive feedback. So these for us, this is what's exciting. The technology itself is not exciting, but the fact that the stuff on the right involves a lot of complexity. So your Facebook feeds are complex in a way that the newspaper is not. Right, because everybody's feed is different. It's been composed based on who your friends are and what you're doing, and it's customised to a degree. Well, in a sense, what we're arguing on this side is technology can build these complex social ecologies in ways which are pretty straightforward and pretty manageable. So Mary and I have written about this in this new learning book, and if you want to go and set up an account in Scholar, we have a community there which is called New Learning, so you can go and join that community. So set up an account and join the New Learning community, and you'll get posts as we go. And we also have that mirrored in Facebook and on Twitter if you want to join it. So I hope I haven't overwhelmed you in the period after lunch. And I think it looks like most of you have stayed awake, so that's a good sign after the good lunch we've had. So thank you very much. So it's over to you folks now if you've got any questions or comments.
Thank you, Prof. Do we have?
Quite an exciting presentation. I'm just wondering, we are saying here, transforming the way we interact, sharing, learning and teaching, but at the same time bring in the aspect of assessment.
Yes.
Now, at the back of my mind, I'm just wondering, what kind of technological needs would one have to have as basics in order for this to be effective?
I mean, we've built this. A lot of people are building applications now, so they just work on the web. So there are no technological needs beyond a web browser. So, I think the challenge for educational technologies in the future is not to build things like Moodle that require complicated installations and somebody to manage them, not to build things like Blackboard, which are expensive to get into a proprietary server, but to build things which are just web-based. So what we've built, and a lot of the best tools these days are just that, and a lot of the tools that people use are just that. All you need is a web browser. So, and to build it so it's compatible across a few platforms. With what we're doing, it's probably a bit too complex for a small screen. You can access it through a small screen, but there's too much going on, and we haven't really designed it for a small screen. But if you've got a regular tablet of some sort, which is a reasonable size, or you've got a laptop computer or something. So as I say, my kind of simple solution is if just build things that are web-based, use things that are web-based, and that then people don't need to install software, and so that's what we've tried to do.
Thank you. My name is Mlulega. I come from Valley University of Technology. It's quite a fascinating presentation, I must say. As you started earlier, you spoke about old schools. Surely they are old teachers. My worry is who's going to empower them as you have done this kind of work? Who's going to capacitate them? Because surely the generation of students of these days are much better, knowledgeable in terms of technology than the old teachers as we speak about the old schools. Yep. So are there any plans in place to empower first the teachers or lecturers?
Right.
Thank you.
The hardest thing is not the technology, but it's the new relationships of learning. That's the hardest thing. So the technologies are relatively straightforward. Nobody's done a Facebook course, and a lot of adults have got into Facebook and Twitter and the like. The hardest thing is that it changes professional practice, and one of the hardest things to do is to actually let go a little bit, allow that the students will be able to run with it. They'll be able to show the teacher how to do things if the teacher's a bit awkward. So, you know, there's a big change in the relationship of teachers to learners, but one is to start trusting the learners, and together we'll figure it out kind of thing. So yes, it's a big, and look, for me, the hardest thing is what this perhaps represents, which is peer-to-peer communication environments and learning analytics-based, big data-based assessment using learning analytics, is that it fundamentally changes the job of the teacher. But one of the things that Mary said at the beginning, it changes the role of the teacher in a way that Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the 18th century would have approved of, because people never approved of schools. People always found them awkward, and they would say, how many people have complained about schools? I remember reading a piece about Gandhi going to school in South Africa, how much he hated school. You know, it was terrible. So there's a long-standing critique. The great Indian poet and philosopher Tagore wrote about schools and tried to build alternative schools. So for centuries we've been trying to do this. So the contradiction is it fundamentally changes the role of schools, but in ways we kind of instinctively felt they had to be changed for a century or more. So, you know, all the urban legends about exams, and the urban legends about the teacher at the front of the room, and the urban legends about the textbook, which is boring. So those things have been with us for a long time, and now we have an opportunity to do something different with these lightweight web-based technologies. So let's try and do it, and for me, it's not the technology, but it's how do we transform those relationships with learning so learners are more engaged and more responsible for their learning too.
Okay, my question is, I think this presentation is exciting with all the things it can do, the technology. There are some underlining issues. For example, in our case, we are using Moodle.
Right.
Okay, now we have this one. Now Scholar, then there are other applications, if you can call them. Okay, now what is that we have to, the things that we have to take into consideration when we are selecting a learning media? What factors we must, because now there are several of them.
Yep.
So now it becomes difficult which one is better, which one is not better. So
let me just say something about Moodle. I have to support Moodle. I have to like Moodle because it's from Australia. Did you know that? It was invented in Australia. But anyhow, it was invented in Australia 20, 25 years ago, before Facebook and before social media, and the underlying web technologies have changed fundamentally. So the kind of technical architecture is like Microsoft SharePoint, upload, download, hub and spoke model. The pedagogical architecture is also quite an old-fashioned one. So Moodle is old now. And there is a new generation of learning management systems which are actually know better than Moodle, so I would give you a quick bit of advice. Don't bother changing to any of them. So there's Canvas, and there's Blackboard, and there's the Coursera platform as well. Essentially, they're the same. They haven't moved on. So we've been lucky to be in a situation where we can get, we're education researchers, we've got research with technologists, with computer scientists, and we've been trying to think of the next generation. It's not there yet. We have it there, right, but it hasn't happened yet. So, that's my general. If I was to answer your question, that's how I'd answer it. We're working with this, and if you want to experiment with this, you're very welcome. We'd love you to do it, and love you to be kind of fellow travellers in this this innovation. But the other question about evaluating things is Mary's 7 questions. Remember the 7 affordances? Ask those 7 questions, right? That's one way to evaluate things. So one of the things we designed that 7 affordances as is, can it do these 7 interesting new things that we want to do, right? Which is ubiquitous learning, multimodal, the 7 things that she mentioned.
Okay. Let's put our hands together, ladies and gentlemen. Thank Professor Cope. Thank you, sir, for such an involved and incisive presentation. We really